Hello everyone, my name is Tom and I'm the Sugma Mail, and you should go and subscribe to Sugma Mail because last week I posted a video over there instead of over here, and now we're back over here. I am known for being a online cartoon reviewer, I guess. I never really liked the idea of being a reviewer. I never really considered my videos to be reviews. I prefer the terminology of analysis because I'm analyzing things. I'm looking at what worked, what didn't work, what did I like, what don't I like, how do I connect with this as a human person who is connecting with art on this earth that is being made to connect with other people on this earth. Because with my experience in doing all this stuff, I've really just come to the conclusion that all of this is just communication. Art is communication. Media is communication. Even what I'm doing is communication. That's ultimately what this is all about. It's about getting what's up here out to you and put it in there for you as well, and for you to understand where I'm coming from, for us to understand where artists and creatives are coming from, for us to find a common ground and just bond over that. That is ultimately what the purpose of art, what the purpose of doing any of this is. It's just to communicate with one another. Anyways, enough of that hippie shit. I'd like to think it's because I have a love for so many things as far as like art and like stories. It is such a huge part of what makes life worth living for me personally. Also because I am just a more laid back person compared to some other people online, I guess. Most of my analysis tends to come out a lot more positive than what is the norm. And this week I was kind of thinking about that. I was like, I don't really understand where people are coming from. At this point, I genuinely think it's just a disconnect, because I'm just gonna be honest, I cannot see the point of view of people who just come online and they have a show that they watched or a movie they watched or whatever, and they're like, I need to find a way to complain about this. I need to just tear it down. I need to nitpick. I need to find the smallest hole and just exasperate it and blow it out of proportion and be angry about it and make sure as many other people are angry as well. I just don't get it. I don't understand that attitude. And I've realized recently that there are genuinely just people on the internet. They don't want good things. They just want to complain. There are genuinely people like that. And then the more people there are like that, or at least the louder those people are, the more people be like, you know what, they got a point. Because I personally didn't like that thing. It's something that for me personally, I feel like it impacts the enjoyment of people who actually want to enjoy things. So I'll give an example, and this might go over some heads, so I'll try and give as much context, pretext, whatever, so you can understand, and then I can apply it to something that hopefully you will understand. If you follow me anywhere, if you are a recurring viewer of this channel, you have probably picked up by now that I'm a very big wrestling fan. And I'll be honest, in the past, I've been an extremely critical wrestling fan because I want to enjoy it. And in that case, I can totally understand when people make videos where they're like, I'm going to just tear apart this season of a show because I had expectations, I saw things that it could have been, and it just didn't meet that expectation. It didn't reach its full potential. That was disappointing to me, so now I'm going to make a video about it, almost as a form of like fan fiction to say this is what could have been. And I understand that from like a creative perspective. I get that, partly because I've been extremely critical of wrestling in the past. I've even just this past week watching Raw, watching a match with some friends on Discord, and I was literally like, what are they doing? Because they had this whole thing where one person looked dumb, one person looked weak. I was like, nobody's looking better coming out of this match. It's just making everyone look stupid. It's making the ref look stupid. And honestly, that's the thing, is like WWE, there have been times where I watch a show and I'm just upset because I'm like, there are so many great talented wrestlers working for WWE. Some of them I've even had the privilege of interacting with, and it's just frustrating for me to see WWE just not give those wrestlers proper opportunity to show how good they are, to give them stories for people to invest in. And what I have decided to do for me personally is, instead of watching WWE and giving them a bunch of my attention, I'm mostly watching right now because the road to WrestleMania, there has never been and may never be a wrestling event like WrestleMania. As far as like crossover into mainstream pop culture, it is the quintessential wrestling event for that reason. To the point where people used to just call all pro wrestling WrestleMania. You're watching WrestleMania and it's just like WCW Nitro. That's WWE. It's like, oh yeah, all pro wrestling is WWE. However, that's not all pro wrestling, because back in 2019, me and my good friend Huey, we drove to Chicago to see an independent wrestling show called All In. And then a year later, that birthed AEW, All Elite Wrestling, a alternative, a challenger brand to WWE that now, for people like me who are like, man, I just can't stand watching WWE, but I still love pro wrestling. Now I don't have to watch WWE because now there's weekly and regularly scheduled TV programming for pro wrestling that is not WWE, that is actually catered to me specifically as a wrestling fan. It is a promotion that caters to my personal preferences as far as the types of wrestlers I want to see, the types of wrestling I want to see, the stories I want to see. It is a place for wrestling fans like me to watch wrestling and enjoy wrestling without having to turn to WWE and continuously be frustrated by the fact that they care more about casual viewers who are not gonna tune in the next week compared to like actual wrestling fans. But the thing about AEW is I've realized that it's not just an alternative, because the internet wrestling community is wild. There are genuinely so many internet wrestling fans who I now realize just want to complain. AEW is not a perfect wrestling promotion, but its flaws are pretty minuscule and inoffensive. At its worst is underwhelming, at its best is incredible, like it was this past weekend. They had their show Revolution, and this was genuinely like, if I had to show someone what I think would be the perfect wrestling show, the perfect wrestling card, where every match fit perfectly in the pacing of the show, everyone was able to bring their A game. The main event between MJF and Bryan Danielson was probably the best 60-minute Iron Man match since Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels. It was genuinely one of the best wrestling shows I've ever seen as far as just like consistency across the board. And this is not an unpopular opinion. There are of course criticisms that can be made, but overall it was an incredible wrestling show and most people agree. However, if you go back just a week from today, people were being doomers. People were saying that AEW was not building up this pay-per-view well enough. They were saying that they feel so they're wasting their time getting invested into this pay-per-view, being like, yeah, I'm gonna watch this and it's just not gonna be good based on what I'm seeing leading up because they aren't doing enough. But now those people are very quiet since the pay-per-view happened. But this isn't the first time this has happened, because the last time, back at Full Gear when AEW had their last pay-per-view, the same thing happened. People were saying they're watching the build-up, it's gonna be bad, and then the hype came back up, and then slowly over time, as we got closer to Revolution, people started being like,
I just don't think they're doing enough with Wardlow. I don't know, this 6-man tag match between the Elite and the House of Black, I feel like they're just kind of throwing it together.
And it's to a point where people are like, oh man, like AEW should just like give up. They should just close down. They're going out of business at this point. Even though all their numbers are perfectly fine, they're perfectly stable, people are just being like such doomers and being like, man, like, you know, they should just give up already. They're never gonna catch up to WWE. They should just stop doing this entirely. And it's so ridiculous because it's like, I personally am having no issue getting invested in AEW. I'm having no issue getting invested in the stories. If I'm having no issue, if my friends who I watch AEW with are for the most part like pretty engaged, even though yes, there is a bit of like a lull between the build-ups, I'm not gonna pretend there isn't, but I know now, as this has happened multiple times, I have trust in the promotion of AEW that when the pay-per-view comes around, I'm gonna feel like I got my money's worth and more. And that's not something that I feel like I'm alone in. I feel like the people I surround myself with agree with that sentiment, but like the greater, like especially like the larger voices in the wrestling community, a lot of the talking heads, the pundits, the journalists, which I feel like a lot of people who call themselves wrestling journalists are just people who manage to get enough of a following from being fans of wrestling, and they also feel like there's a stigma around being a wrestling fan, and they're like, oh no, I'm not a fan, I'm a journalist, I'm professional, I'm part of the business. Like, dude, just say you like wrestling. Like, if you like something, you shouldn't be ashamed of it. Like, I just find that so cringe that there are so many people who get over 1,000 followers on Twitter and they're like, no, I'm not a wrestling fan, I'm a wrestling journalist. But regardless, I'm going off on a like crazy tangent. My point is pro wrestling is now at a point where not only is there AEW and WWE, there's also New Japan, there's also so many pro wrestling promotions, there's MLW, there's Impact. You can watch any wrestling. You have a choice. Like, it's all accessible. It's the most accessible it's ever been. If you genuinely have an issue with a wrestling company, you don't have to watch it. You have that choice. Like, you do not have to follow it. You don't have to watch it. Like, that's what I've done with WWE. I don't complain about WWE because I don't have to watch it. There are definitely times where it's like they pulled me in and get me invested, and I'm like, I got disappointed. I got bamboozled. But my point is, pro wrestling's at a point where you don't have to watch anything if you don't want to. And it's so easy to just opt out of watching something. It's so easy to just like be like, WWE sucks right now, I'm just not gonna watch it. That's so easy to do. And yet there are still so many people who are like, man, I cannot wait to complain about what happened on AEW Dynamite this week. I cannot wait to say how Rampage was mid. I can't wait to just go on Twitter and complain, and I just don't get that. And also, like I said, AEW is not perfect, but most of their issues are pretty minuscule, pretty inoffensive, so it's really people just hyper-focusing on the smallest thing and being like, this is unacceptable, they should close their doors over this. I'm like, bro, you sound absolutely deranged. Why would they do that? Why is that? Why are you saying this? Also, like, it's so easy to just be like, yeah, that wasn't that great. Anyways, did you see that Iron Man match? That was insane. The reason I'm talking about this, even though I'm sure most of you do not care about wrestling, the reason I'm talking about this is because I feel like this applies to everything. I feel like this applies to animation as well, where it might be a little bit harder because sometimes you just gotta watch a whole season to figure out, you know, Saberspark dropped this video about Star versus Forces of Evil very recently, and that was an example of a show where it's like, yeah, people were pretty understandably upset at the ending because you brought us along, you got us invested for 4 seasons, and then at the end you screwed it up. But even then, for me, it's like, is Star versus the Forces of Evil the first show, the first story, the first anything that people got really invested in, and then the ending wasn't that great? Definitely not. And I think I even talked about this pretty recently, where, you know, the ending wasn't great, but I can still appreciate the 3 seasons where I was really invested and I really cared about the show. I can at least take that and walk away and be like, you know what, at least I have that. And I guess that's a bit of a glass half full type of mentality, but I just don't understand finding reasons, bending over backwards almost to find reasons, or taking little things that weren't perfect and hyper focusing on them to work yourself into a frenzy over a show that you otherwise enjoyed, and just finding a reason to be angry. I don't get it. I don't understand that mentality, because I just keep seeing it so much where it's like people have to find a reason to be upset about stuff. They have to have something to complain about. Like, dude, life sucks. Like, there's plenty of things in real life that are overwhelming and just stressful and awful. I don't understand why people are looking to media to be like, man, I just want to get upset. And even where the last 6 years of my life, my job was watching these shows, there were genuinely times where I watched a show that I probably wouldn't otherwise, and I was like, man, that sucked. But I never wanted to have like a negative point of view on that. I also feel like it's a little bit of a problem. Not a huge problem, but I have noticed this here and there, and this is for the younger, like, newer creators out there. There have been times where I've watched, like, a review on, like, say, this isn't a specific video I have in mind, but I watch, like, a hypothetical video on the Proud Family, and the person making the video is spending like the majority of the video talking about how racist people are angry at something that happened in the Proud Family. That's something that I don't think is worth doing, because I've talked about a lot of shows that are the target of alt-right weirdos like She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, for example, because I made a lot of videos about She-Ra. The first couple videos I made definitely made a point to like say like, hey, you know, if you're homophobic, fuck off. Like, if you're homophobic, if you're racist, if you're misogynist, you're a loser. But then after like those first couple videos, I was like, okay, don't care about those people. They don't exist anymore. I'm making this video entirely for the people who actually enjoyed the show. And that was just the mentality I took on. This is a video for the target audience of the show, and I feel like that's important, because if I pull up a video on, say, like Devil Sword and Moon Girl, and the video is entirely talking about like, oh man, white people on Twitter were real mad about this, I'm like, okay, but like, you know, I get it. I get that we live in a racist society, I get that that's the case, but like, why am I going to a space where we are supposed to be celebrating normalization of having black girls in media, and then you're spending the entire time giving attention to the racist people? This is something that, like I said, I did in the past, and I feel like, you know, as I saw it happen more and more, I realized that's not a good way to go about doing things. And I just feel like being positive, especially when you're making videos, when you're trying to entertain people and give people a little bit of an escape from their everyday lives, I feel like it's your responsibility to kind of give them a place where they can enjoy a positive space. I guess maybe some people just cope with that everyday grind by complaining about things, but at the very least, I hope this video gave some clarity on why I choose not to do that, why I try to be extremely, almost obnoxiously positive sometimes about the way I talk about media. And that's about all I gotta say.